ben Isra de Blauwe, medisch entomoloog aan het Instituut voor Tropische Geneeskunde. In deze video toon ik je hoe je larven van steekmuggen kan onderscheiden van andere larven en hoe je een larve van een steekmug kan identificeren tot op genusniveau. Er komen momenteel 5 muggengenera voor in België: Helix, Caliceta, Aedes, Anopheles en Cochleatidia. In het kader van de monitoring van exotische Aedes-steekmuggen is het belangrijk om de genera te herkennen, zodat we de Aedes-muggen kunnen scheiden van de andere genera.
To identify a mosquito larva, you need to know its morphology. It consists of 3 main parts: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. An important body part is the 8th abdominal segment with the breeding openings, which are in all genera, except Anopheles, situated at the apex of the breeding tube. The larvae are always found in the water and have to come to the surface to take oxygen. The following characteristics are useful to distinguish a mosquito larva from larvae of similar flies. A mosquito larva has a clear head and thorax without foot-like appendages. It usually has a clear breathing tube and comes to the surface to breathe. It can hang with the head down in the water or parallel to the surface. Other typical characteristics are not easily visible in the field without a stereo microscope or loupe. These are the clear antennae, the fused segments of the thorax, which are wider than the abdominal segments, and the many long hairs on the thorax and abdomen. The larvae of similar flies often have an unclear head and thorax, with sometimes foot-like appendages. They rarely have a clear breathing tube and often stay underwater. The other characteristics, which are not easily visible in the field without a stereo microscope or loupe, are the unclear antennae, the often separated segments of the thorax, which are as wide as the abdomen, and the rare long hairs on the thorax and abdomen. An example is the lake fly from the Chironomidae family. Other similar flies are the phantom midge from the Carboridae family and the meniscus midge from the Dixidae family. Larvae from the genus Anopheles have no breathing tube. Their breathing openings are found directly on the 8th abdominal segment. In all other genera, a breathing tube is present. Anopheles larvae hang parallel to the water surface. They make a very fast and unclear S form when swimming. A common species in Belgium is Anopheles plumbeus. Typical breeding sites are tree holes and artificial containers such as used tires, but also large manure collecting pits of abandoned and unclean pig stables. Another less common species is Anopheles maculipennis, which is associated with forested and semi-natural areas. Larvae of this species can be found in artificial containers and natural water bodies such as ponds. Larvae from the genus Cochleatidia are characterized by a short and pointed breathing tube. The larvae are attached to the roots or stem of an aquatic plant and take their oxygen from that plant. The one and only Cochleatidia species in Belgium is Cochleatidia ricardii. This species is associated with natural areas such as wetlands. Larvae from the genus Culex have a long breathing tube with several pairs of ventral tufts of hairs. For this characteristic, a loupe or stereo microscope is needed. Helix larvae hang with their head down in the water. They make a spastic and incomplete S form when swimming. The most common mosquito in Belgium is from the Helix genus, the house mosquito or Helix pipiens. Their breeding sites are very diverse and can be natural or artificial. In fresh or even highly polluted water. You can easily find the house mosquito in rainwater barrels in your garden. The 2 remaining genera are Caliceta and Aedes. The larvae of both genera have a breathing tube with 1 pair of ventral tufts of hairs. For this characteristic, a loupe or stereo microscope is needed. Aedes and Caliceta larvae also hang with their head down in the water. They make a distinctive, graceful and complete S form when swimming. In the larvae of the genus Caliceta, the ventral tufts of hair are inserted at the base of the breathing tube. A common species in Belgium is the bandit mosquito or Caliceta annulata. The larvae live in similar breeding sites as Helix pipiens. In larvae of the genus Aedes, the ventral tufts of hair are inserted at the middle of the breeding tube. A well-known exotic Aedes species regularly introduced in Belgium is a tiger mosquito or Aedes albopictus. Typical breeding sites are artificial containers such as tires, road drains, rainwater barrels and buckets. Two other exotic Aedes species are Aedes japonicus and Aedes courageus. Both species are established in Belgium. Larvae can be found in tree or rock holes and in artificial containers such as tires, metal construction equipment and flower vases. To summarize, Anopheles larvae do not have a breeding tube and hang parallel to the water surface. In all the other genera, a breeding tube is present and the larvae hang with their head down in the water. Cochleatidia larvae have a short and pointed breeding tube and are attached to the roots of stems of plants. Helix larvae have a long breeding tube with several pairs of ventral tufts of hairs. Caliceta larvae have one pair of ventral tufts of hairs at the base of their breeding tube, while Aedes have one pair of ventral tufts of hairs at the middle of their breeding tube. A loupe or stereo microscope is needed to see the hairs on the breeding tube.